one of my philosophies in business is collaboration, and that means engaging with people who you trust. And that old mantra of the best managers surround themselves with people who are more skilled and more able than them. Well, that's really what I try to do. Collaboration involves getting smart people in the room and allowing smart people to do their skills and delivering their skill sets. And that's what I try to do with the people I engage with.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Constructing Mindsets. I'm your host, Vincent Saunders. This is all about changing the way we talk about the construction industry. Whether you're on the tools or supporting others behind the scene, we are hearing from the people who are shining their light and making a difference. Thanks for joining us. Let's get into the episode. Yeah, well, the idea behind it is really just to talk to as many people as I know in the industry, but doing completely different roles. It's not just a builder to builder podcast. I've, got site managers, electricians, plumbers, an operations manager lined up. So friends, ex-colleagues, people that I've worked with throughout my career so far. So the idea is just to chat to as many people as possible and get the good insights into, the good people in the industry, really. That's kind of what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, that's great because you're going to get a wide variety of skill sets, a wide variety of answers. You'll probably get an objective opinion from most of the people because construction is relatively honest. It's funny, I've been approached to do an interview with a recruitment agent. He wants to do a podcast interview. And I met someone last week who said, I'm thinking of starting a podcast and I'll interview you as well. It's like I've got these opportunities to be interviewed, and I'm thinking I'm probably at the point of my career where I do have an opinion, a balanced opinion. And that's really where I want to come across here. I'd like to talk about perspectives from different sort of angles and areas of expertise that I've garnered across, my time in the industry. And that's hopefully what we can achieve here.
Down as the Managing Director of Interior Design and Build at the moment, which, so
I've undergone a rebrand in April. We can talk about it, but essentially the business was trading as Interior Design Build, and what that did was it promoted me as a design build contractor, and the industry is still coming round to the idea of design build being a procurement strategy that benefits all parties. And in promoting that as my primary strategy, it unfortunately meant that when I approached architects for work, they saw me as a competitor or competition to their offering. And the majority of work that I've been delivering over the last 5 years has been build only. And it's only very occasionally does a client want a design build contract, which is an end-to-end process. So I've relabeled the company. The trading as entity is now IDB. Right. I've just shortened Interior Design Build to IDB.
Yep,
and I've issued a capability statement to various clients that talks about my offering, which is closer to what I'm actually doing right now. Or IDB.
Managing Director of IDB.
IDB, yeah, IDB.
So I wanted to have you on because obviously I know you through sort of your residential work that we've done project together. I also noticed...
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we met into a residential capacity, but I'm actually delivering mostly commercial projects.
Yes.
Although I've run a residential house building company.
Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk to you is those sort of residential versus commercial sort of projects that you've done, also your international experience throughout your career. And basically that's kind of, where the idea of getting you on just to share your journey that you've been on from where you started to where you are today and sort of touch through some of those residential and commercial aspects of your career and the international stuff as well. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to try and capture is just all the different perspectives and all the different people that are out there around the construction industry. Because as soon as you think of construction, you kind of think of the trades, the architects, the engineers, but there's hundreds of different roles that are out there. Winding back there, Chris, maybe your sort of how you got started into construction. You're a trained quantity surveyor.
Look, my experience started as a labourer. working for various construction companies in Wellington in the mid to late 1980s. I was fortunate enough to have two next door neighbours who ran either a construction company or were senior managers at construction companies, specifically in Wellington. And during school holidays, I would go into these building sites and perform a labouring function. And you're really seeing the industry from the ground up at that point, sweeping floors, digging holes. So my first sort of experience with construction was as a labourer. My grandfather on my father's side was also a construction worker in the United Kingdom. So I guess I picked up my sort of innate sort of desire for construction from him. And it always felt like an industry that I would be involved with in some way, shape or form. And I guess when I finished college, you're left with a number of decisions as to what you're going to do and how you're going to sort of gain experience. And at that point, I decided to do some papers at Polytechnic in Wellington and get initially some sort of training. And I spent 2 years at a technical institute, came out of the industry in the early 90s in a recession and had to undertake, again, roles that were not really related to construction until I could secure a cadetship quantity surveying role at a fit-out company in the mid-90s. So there was a period there where, like many 20-somethings in the 2025 era, where you're coming out of your university time and you're trying to work out what you want to do and you're looking for opportunities to gain experience, and that's really where I was throughout the early 90s. I wanted to try something else other than construction, and during that 3-year period I obtained a private pilot's license and then went on and obtained a commercial pilot's license. And so I came out of that particular experience with some core skills, but ultimately decided to not become an airline level captain or pilot and return to construction. And so I've been in the construction industry since 1995, so effectively now for the last 30.
And initially coming out of university there, how did you kind of gain that experience you needed to kind of then move into, I guess, the next phase of your construction career, like be it into that cadetship or into project management after that?
My focus was always to gain as much experience as possible, as quickly as possible, in a wide variety of roles. Initially, I was a contractor's QS for a shop fitter in Wellington for two very experienced senior level individuals, good businessmen, a lot of experience in the industry. And so my early days was literally as a quantity surveyor. And the reason I chose quantity surveying was my perception of the industry was that money is the controlling factor in most of what happens in construction. Ultimately, you're delivering a product, but if you have to be in control of the money to understand. And that level of control gives you that understanding of the process and the flow of money from the client through the contractor to the subcontractors. And my choice was to have a control of the money initially. But it was like, ultimately, it's like being an accountant, I guess. There are a lot of accountants who move on from the profession and specialise in another area, or use their accountancy skills to fall back on, or have them as a sideline to what they actually are delivering, which could be business ownership or some other related management role within the industry. And ultimately, after 7 or 8 years of being a quantity surveyor, I decided that I needed to have more of a wide-ranging responsibility for a project, which ultimately moved me into construction management and project management.
How did you get to that thought process around having a wider scale of knowledge needed for that construction, for your overall construction career? Yeah, where did that come from?
So I spent 3.5, 4 years in Wellington as a contractor's QS, and around that time I had a desire to move to the United Kingdom, having undertaken qualifications at Polytechnic and then had work experience. So I went to the United Kingdom with visions of gaining experience over there, and went into a more professional environment to gain that sort of client-side experience. The work in the United Kingdom was obviously at a different level, where you could literally look at the sort of projects you delivered in New Zealand and then choose a particular construction company or consultancy and focus on an area where you actually liked to work in, i.e., my preference at that point in the late 90s, early 2000s was retail fitting out. And my experience was literally acting as a client's cost consultant, cost controlling retail projects and hospitality projects actually. Later on in the 2000s, I realised that there wasn't really enough in the role for me. I'd moved around different organisations. I'd actually gone back to contracting in the United Kingdom, and I realised that my wheelhouse was probably going to be back in a contracting environment. And I was approached by an Australian guy who was setting up a construction services business at that point in time. And he asked me to come on board to manage the construction division. So I literally invested in that company along with 7 other people, and I headed up a small residential construction division of a larger business offering construction services, including payroll, property management, and other sort of associated construction services. And I stayed with them until 2011, when I ultimately left the United Kingdom to continue my journey elsewhere. But that 5-6 year period in London managing that construction company again took delivery to a new level, delivering houses for very wealthy individuals in London, high net worth people, lawyers, bankers, people who demand a high level of service and delivery, people comfortable with money who understand, business itself. And that's very much, built. My service was built on reputation and delivering what you say you can deliver. A degree of professionalism, integrity, honesty, straightforward business.
When you first got into the construction industry, do you remember what drew you to it?
I think it was probably the idea of seeing a project evolve in a relatively short period of time. And when I say short period of time, I'm talking about, weeks to months. Physically seeing things constructed, seeing different people come together, different trades, building something, having something at the end of it that you can look at and actually admire. Architecture, design, that always interested me, although I became more of a cost controller initially, a quantity surveyor. I always appreciated the design and the aesthetic of buildings, and I think that's probably what drew me most to it, along with my sort of family connection to the construction industry, as I mentioned earlier.
Was it what you expected when you first got into it?
Well, there's always as I say, the New Zealand way, the jovial sort of, banter on site, and a lot of that's obviously disappeared now with the evolution of the way people interact and, But actually the humour, the straightforward approach, it was a place where you could just feel comfortable talking to people. There was no sort of hidden agenda or how should I say, ulterior motive. We're all there to do a job, and the interaction with your colleagues was something that I actually enjoyed. It was an environment I felt comfortable in. I think initially, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't particularly drawn to physically being on a building site. And so the idea of being a quantity surveyor in an office was probably something that I preferred more than actually being stuck in a porter cabin on site. That was one thing that I didn't lean into, and I look back at that now and I realise that is what I've been leaning into over the last 6 years, and that's doing things that I typically didn't do at an earlier part of my career. I often question whether or not I should have become a carpenter and spent the first 5 or 6 years of my career as a builder on site, and then gone into the quantity surveying and the project management. My nephew, my sister's son, he works for a highly regarded builder in Wellington, and he's become a builder, and he's now in his mid to late 20s. And I would encourage him to get off the tools and take papers and then move into sort of management. It's a logical step, and I do question whether or not I should have done that. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. You get the experience, you set yourself a path, you have a mindset around where you want to go and what you want to achieve, and you take the steps towards that.
Like, how's your mindset changed from maybe your early part of your career to where you are at now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've always had a passion for construction, and I've always wanted to succeed in the whatever role I'm undertaking. So my mindset, yeah, it's a really tricky question. I can talk about, because what I don't want to do is talk about the failures, because you really, and this is not about lamenting, where my experience has not gone to plan, or where things have gone wrong in my career, because things always go wrong, and it's about how you deal with them. And so we talk about mindset change. I've probably become more resilient. I've probably become a person who's had to, rather than identify an issue and choose not to address it by sort of either ignoring it or moving away from it. My mindset now is about leaning into issues that are problems and confronting them and facing them and actually dealing with them. And ultimately that's a progression and gets you through the whatever the challenge is that you're confronted with.
You did talk about like sort of failures and challenges that you've had throughout your career. What sort of challenges have you faced throughout your career?
I mean, confidence has been probably an issue. Has been a challenge. I mean, it really depends on what challenges and when. I think for the early part of my career, it was more about confidence. More recently, it's more about how, as a business owner, you transition into business ownership. And then at that point, you have different sets of challenges. You've got macro level COVID, you've got a recession that presents challenges to you, lack of momentum in the sector. You've got those sort of challenges as well. And then you've got the delivery challenges, which could range from engagement of subcontractors, managing clients. It's the full gambit of running a business. And so what you try and do, I categorize myself as a risk manager, and you look at everything from a risk perspective. And I've had that mindset now for probably 10 years, but running a business, you're definitely more focused on how risk impacts your business at every angle, i.e. engagement with clients, engagement with subcontractors, suppliers, interactions with people. It is a very specific mindset, risk management.
And what's your approach with that risk management when things don't go to plan?
So I would probably take a step back, identify why it's become a problem, determine if it's what financial impact it has on the business. This is in no particular order. Look at ways that I've dealt with a similar issue previously. Implement process. I would probably lean into it, engage with the people, engage with whoever's involved in this particular challenge.
Like, key takeaways being, from your point of view, is to take a step back, take a breather, try and see the whole issue or the whole perspective from all sides and all parties that are involved.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of my philosophies in business is collaboration, and that means engaging with people who you trust. And that old mantra of the best managers surround themselves with people who are more skilled and more able than them. Well, that's really what I try to do. I'm certainly not a brash sort of outspoken leader who takes the first step forward with the troops behind him. This isn't a battlefield environment. Collaboration involves getting smart people in the room and allowing smart people to do their skills and delivering their skill sets. And that's what I try to do with the people I engage with. And I'm more about sort of quiet achieving, conservative approach, or, it really is about the product being the end result representing what I'm about.
Was that always the way you sort of conducted yourself?
No, not at all. That's probably come about in the last 10 to 15 years. I realised that I wasn't either skilled enough, bright enough, able enough to be able to, and commanding enough. You've got to have a self-awareness. I mean, that's one of my key skills, is my ability to sort of understand my limitations. And then at that point, once you've gained that self-awareness, you can then engage with people in a more comfortable place, because you're not trying to be something or someone or represent something. You are just being a genuine person operating with integrity. And people warm to that. People understand it. They can look at you and go, okay, I understand him. I can work with him. And therefore, the people that I engage with, we have a relationship that means that it's a two-way communication that's operating here. And in doing so, that promotes a collaborative approach, promotes a better outcome, in my opinion.
And what do you see the benefit on that type of approach being a sort of all-inclusive approach to solving a problem rather than sort of a directional...
Well, that's exactly the point. When a problem arises, you're removing any sort of possibility of blame game. What you're doing is you're saying we're collaborating on the journey here. So therefore, we need to stick together when there is an issue, when there's a problem on site, something's gone wrong. Things go wrong every day. There are constant problems on site. The industry revolves around resolving issues, and the way the industry is set up with the sub-trade model, you've got different people who probably won't work together again on a project that's been designed for the first time. I mean, the challenges of the industry is specifically that you're dealing with a one-off project, a bespoke project, every time you build. And the industry's attempted to resolve that through off-site manufacture, and we can talk about that. But for the most part, projects on site are a one-off. From the design, the client, the design, and the deliverables, which is the construction team that I manage. It's a one-off. So what you try and do is you work with trusted partners, subcontractors and suppliers. So you have a working relationship with them that is collaborative. And what it does is it helps you manage the risk of the delivery and diminishes the chance of there being either a gap in pricing, a gap in a deliverable. And if there is a problem, which there always is, I can take a phone call and know that we're going to reach a solution that will probably cost me money. It'll probably cost the subcontractor money, but there's no risk transfer. This isn't about putting the blame on someone else. That's a typical industry mantra of the 80s and 90s. I saw it in New Zealand in Wellington in the 90s, where you could, even at a very early part of my career, identified a non-sustainable construction entity. They simply couldn't continue in the long run because of the way they engaged with subcontractors, risk transfer, lowest price, race to the bottom. It's never going to work. It was never going to work, and it never can work. And we can talk about the evolution of the industry and how the industry needs to evolve and change. And it will do over time, but it has got better.
How do you find or build a strong relationship in the industry?
Again, it's a skill set that you build up over time. You know, you can either have recommendations with suppliers and subcontractors, or you can be introduced to a client. How do you build relationships? It takes time. It takes references. You can look at how they're presenting themselves through different pieces of documentation. I don't always get it right. But ultimately, if you've been around long enough in the industry, you get the cut of people's jib pretty quickly, and you can gauge whether or not you should be engaging with them as a collaborator, a subcontractor, supplier, whoever, it doesn't matter. I had a meeting today with a subcontractor. It went really well. I was really impressed with the way he presented himself. I felt confident that I could work with him. It was a one-on-one meeting. You know, you can't do these things in writing. It has to be a one-on-one conversation about each other's offering and how you could work together and what your expectations are. It's honesty, integrity, straightforward communication.
Touched on throughout the podcast a bit of residential and a bit of commercial stuff. Like, I don't know if we could just maybe take a small sidetrack and just talk about some of those differences. You've been in the residential, well, I know you in the residential sector, but quite a lot of experience in the commercial sector. Somebody looking at construction for the first time, like, what's the difference between residential side of construction and the commercial side of construction?
Well, it's quite clear for me. In a residential environment, you're dealing with a client who is very emotionally invested in the outcome. And you're also relying heavily on the architect as well to have produced good drawings, and the process is really about delivering the highest possible product to a budget, and quality is obviously one of the highest priorities. In a commercial environment, it's more transactional. You've got a budget, you've got a design, you deliver a good product, but time is more important and cost is more important than quality. So really the time cost quality triangle is really how you measure the key differences between the two sectors. In terms of my preference, I'm actually comfortable working in either residential or commercial. The runway for residential projects is longer because there's a consenting process, there's a design process, then a consenting process and a delivery process. Whereas in the commercial environment, you typically engage with an architect, the design is done, you bid the work and it's undertaken reasonably quickly. I mean, the projects that I'm involved with are up to $5 million, and so we're looking at anything from 4 to 30 weeks on site.
Thinking about your career, what's a moment in your career that has made you proud?
I thought about that. And pride for me really is in delivering a good product, having my reputation maintained, being able to successfully hand over a product that a client likes or a client that's well received by a client. I built an animal hospital for a client in Henderson. It was a 30-week project. They moved in, they were happy, and that provided me with a great sense of pride, having delivered that project. This is interesting, Vincent. You look at people in other industries like hospitality, for example, and you question why they would be in the industry where it's long hours and the pay's not that great or it's highly risky. People would look at the construction industry and probably think the same. And I guess if you've got the energy for a build project and you understand the factors and the risk and what goes into making it a success and understanding the touch points along the way. It's really seeing a project from end to end is really where I get the most enjoyment out of, actually, to be honest. It's obviously handing over a project is important, but being involved, being in control, delivering it and having everyone make money as well. This is one of the factors in the industry that's talked about more now than it has been. But, I'm a strong advocate of making sure that people actually make money. Typically, originally, 20, 25 years ago, that risk transfer that I touched on earlier was really, it left open the possibility of people seriously going out of business because they were doing work and not getting paid. Whereas it's much more spoken about now that builders, subcontractors, suppliers, people in the industry acknowledge that it's important that actually we all make money. And I'm a strong advocate of that, and I've been that way for a long time. I'd like to see people succeed, deliver a good product, and everyone makes money.
Kind of a good segue into the sort of one of the last parts, but looking ahead sort of for yourself and your business, what are your aspirations for industry going forward?
Well, let's start with the industry going forward. My experience in the United Kingdom was significant and formative. My time in Wellington with the shop fitter was equally as important because it gave me an excellent grounding in quantity surveying. But the United Kingdom, the way the construction industry had evolved in the 90s, there were a number of government reports that were issued, the Latham Report and the Egan Report. It brought about change in the industry and a degree of maturity that that is still lacking in the New Zealand construction industry here. And by that I mean, a contractual environment that sees quantity surveyors administering contracts, different types of contracts which are more fairly written, that simply haven't evolved over time and become this bastardized version of a contract that literally could have special conditions that are 30 pages more than the original contract. The industry in New Zealand, the construction industry in New Zealand still needs to mature, and there needs to be better ways of procuring contracts. There needs to be possibly more barriers to entry into the industry. It takes a career's worth of experience to actually be able to run a construction company successfully. These things a construction company is hard work and it requires constant attention, and with different things hitting you at different times and different challenges, it's about how you react to it. We've talked about that. But as an industry, it does need to evolve, and there needs to be some sort of body, and you could argue that these construction bodies are already there. Master Builders Association, etc., and the New Zealand Institute of Builders. And maybe I don't engage with them enough, but I still see there's a lot of room to mature as an industry, starting with the way projects are procured and the flow of money, which I talked about earlier as a quantity surveyor, being more fairly weighted. Well, the contracts being more fairly weighted and for balanced is really what I'm trying to say. In terms of my outlook, it's funny because we talked about COVID earlier and the recession. I'm actually still waiting to get a good run at this thing. You know, I've been on a roller coaster now for 5 years in my business, and I've made a primary goal over the next 2 years to grow my business. I've taken on a quantity surveyor part-time. I'm training her up. And actually, it's an interesting perspective because I'm looking at her skill set at 20, having done probably a similar set of papers to me, 2-year quantity surveying course. And I realise how much knowledge and skill I've got and how much I can impart that skill on her and lift her into the role that she's looking to into her career. So there may well be some sort of role where I'm giving back more, not necessarily in a business environment, could be elsewhere. And in terms of how I'd like my business to evolve, yeah, I've got a vision of where I want the business to be in 5 years, and that may well be me taking a step back into management. The last 5 years have literally seen me leaning into a role where I'm on site delivering, literally doing what I didn't do theoretically in the 90s, which was spending time on construction sites on a daily basis, managing teams, and actually I've almost done it round the other way. I'm actually going back into a place which I probably originally felt uncomfortable, and that's one of the things that I've focused on over the last 5 years is doing things that you actually feel uncomfortable about, leaning into the things that are challenging and overcoming those challenges. It's really important that we're able to do that.
How do you feel thinking about 5 years ago and thinking about Chris now?
Mindset, it's stressful. It is very stressful being self-employed. It's very stressful running a company. It's very stressful not worrying about where the cash flow in the business. I've got to be honest with you. If you wanted to start your own business, there are many stories about successful entrepreneurs, but for the most part, there are people around me, us all the time here, grafting away, grinding away at this thing, trying to make a living. And that's simply what I'm doing here. I'm successful at what I do. I'm very skilled at what I do. I can say that with confidence, but it is hard work and it requires constant attention. I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but I mean, we're going to go a bit off topic here, but when I look at the younger generation coming through, they're facing a series of challenges that I did not face in the 90s. We're talking about, the runway for someone at 20 to gain experience in the industry eventually to the level that I've got is not clear to me anymore. You've got arguably artificial intelligence and computerization of roles, hollowing out of really the first 5 to 10 years of your career being automated. Well, somehow along the way, construction workers, if we're being specific here, have to get that experience. And how do you get that experience? And what do you need to do to gain that experience? And really, it could come back to, well, I've got to do some labouring for 4 years, or I've got to start somewhere where I don't feel comfortable. But actually, ultimately, you're going to have to start the journey somewhere and get that experience. And there will be the knowledge transfer. It will happen. But you can't gain the knowledge in construction through doing courses. It's got to be practically based, good mentoring, good leadership, knowledge transfer with the people, the senior people in the industry, hands-on. It's all very well being a senior manager at a large construction company, running a business, operations, HR. These are the people in the industry that need to be on site dealing or interacting with the younger generation to lift them through. I know I'm talking about it in a very direct way, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to share my skills with everyone that I come into contact with.
Yeah, I did, maybe before we end, I did have a note there just to talk about, I know you from working in the regions. You obviously do a lot of work in the main cities. Like, what's the difference between working in a regional town in New Zealand compared to some of the main cities in New Zealand?
I was tasked with going down, finding the delivery teams. I literally had to go and interview builders, concrete places, local subcontractors. I started from scratch. And there's, you've really, one of the first things that I did was actually ring up a builder and then started gain confidence in his ability to deliver and speak to local plumbers and architects and actually get referrals from them and actually use them as the touch points for networking within the industry, the local industry I'm talking about. But in terms of how I interacted with them, and is there any difference between local suppliers and subcontractors and builders? Not really. No, I didn't feel like there was a marked difference. You are seeing a wide variety of skill sets and motivations. That would probably be one point one particular point of difference. It depends on the location and how motivated people are to deliver.
Where can people find or connect with you?
Sure. I mean, I've got a website, www.interiordb.co.nz. Contact me through LinkedIn. I'm always open for a conversation, chat, an opportunity to talk. Working with clients, I have had a very open philosophy. It's a how can I help you approach to doing business, or how can I tailor my service to suit your needs. I pride myself on being adaptable. One of the things we didn't talk about earlier, which we did sort of touch on, but I pride myself in being able to sit in a room with different construction representatives and know their drivers and touch points and what they want to get out of their particular role at the table. And I think it's important to be able to do that, because then you can have a better read of the room. And so you're not siloed in the way that you operate. It's very obvious when you go into a meeting or into an environment in any industry and you can see the siloed approach and it not working. And so my skill set is being able to read the room, understand people's drivers, understand what they want to get out of it, and bring to that table that collaborative approach that I mentioned earlier. That's where my skill sets lie.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, we'll probably finish up there, Chris.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for the opportunity to talk with you. Very much appreciated, and I do hope the listeners enjoy.
That's it for today's episode of Constructing Mindsets. Remember, every conversation is a chance to shift the culture of construction. Reviews are always appreciated. Until next time, take care and keep showing up with good energy.